Good morning, everyone. Welcome to First Unitarian Church in New Bedford. I am Karen LeBlanc, and I welcome you here this morning. We are a beloved community of people who believe that everyone is worthy of respect, that science is real, the democratic process is a sacred thing, and that we are all part of an interconnected web, and that the light and energy we share and put out makes a difference in this world. We are people of purpose, and if what you hear today resonates with you, we hope you will consider becoming part of this way cool family of seekers and keepers of this long dream that is our church. Let us light our flame this morning, light our chalice. Let this flame be the spark of adventure in our hearts and minds. May no 2 days ever be the same. And may we be reminded again and again not to take ourselves too seriously and to tell our stories. Today is going to be a day of story, as is the theme this month. Everything you will be hearing today is from The Hunting of the Snark by Lewis Carroll. So let's begin with this to light our chalice. He reminded me then, said that mildest of men, if your snark be a snark, that is right. Fetch it home by all means, you can serve it with greens, and it's handy for striking a light. Our opening words from The Landing. Just the place for a snark, the bellman cried as he landed his crew with care, supporting each man on the top of the tide by a finger entwined in his hair. Just the place for a snark, I have said it twice, that alone should encourage the crew. Just the place for a snark, I have said it thrice, what I tell you 3 times is true. The crew was complete. It included a boots and a maker of bonnets and hoods, a barrister brought to arrange their disputes, and a broker to value their goods, a billiard maker whose skill was immense, might perhaps have won more than his share, but a banker engaged at enormous expense had the whole of their cash in his care. There was also a beaver that paced on the deck, or would sit making lace in the bow, and had often, the bellman said, saved them from wreck, though none of the sailors knew how. Let us take the time to greet one another in spirit until we can be together again in September. I look forward to that day so much. So let's just send some light and love out to each other. And I know we're getting it back. Let us recite our covenant together. We come together as a religious community, upholding freedom of conscience, right relationship, and the inherent worth of all people. We value our diversity and pledge to care for one another in the spirit of compassion, to speak and listen to each other with respect, and to promote justice and kindness in the world. And now let us sing a hymn together. This is number 34, Though I May Speak with Bravest Fire. I may speak with bravest fire and have the gift to all inspire, and have not love, my words are vain as sounding brass and hopeless gain. and strangely thin. Come, Spirit, come, our hearts control, our spirits long to be made whole. Let inward love guide every deed. By this we worship and are free. Now is the time in our service where we share with each other our candles of joy, celebration, healing, and love. So the first candle I would like to light is for Larry. We told you last week he was back in hospital. He is now at Hathaway Manor on the mend, and hopefully he'll be home soon. So let's light a candle for Larry. Candle of love and joy for our sexton, Tony Gonzalez, who also got married last week or the week before to a wonderful lady named Grace. Congratulations, Tony and Grace. So glad to see you happy, my friend. Candle of love and joy for Yasmin. We had a great AHA this week. Not a lot of people came, but the ones that were there stuck around. We had a great time. I met a couple of really cool kids, Liam and Millie, and we had a terrific time. So I encourage people to start coming back out to AHA and walking around to see who's open now. So last week I lit a candle of joy for all those who have gotten vaccinated. It's been great to be able to interact with people when you're all vaccinated. So this week I'll light a candle of concern for those who are still resisting. Resistance is futile. Get your vaccine. And I will light 2 candles, as is our practice here, one for all of those joys and sorrows and concerns and fears we have in our hearts, and one for all of those folks who have yet to find a cool, supportive, loving place like this to share their joys and sorrows in. Okay. The first reading is from the Bellman's speech. Come listen, my men, while I tell you again the 5 unmistakable marks by which you may know wheresoever you go the warranted, genuine Snarks. Let us take them in order. The first is the taste, which is meager and hollow but crisp, like a coat that is rather too tight in the waist, with a flavor of will-o'-the-wisp. It's a habit of getting up late, you'll agree, that it carries too far when I say that it frequently breakfasts at 5 o'clock tea and dines on the following day. The third is its slowness in taking a jest, should you happen to venture one. It will sigh like a thing that is deeply depressed, and it always looks grave at a pun. The fourth is its fondness for bathing machines, which it constantly carries about, and believes that they add to the beauty of scenes, a sentiment open to doubt. The fifth is ambition. It next will be right to describe each particular batch, distinguishing those that have feathers and bite, and those that have whiskers and scratch. For although common Snarks do no manner of harm, yet I feel it my duty to say, some are Boojums. The bellman broke off in alarm, for the baker had fainted away. Join me now in the spirit of prayer and meditation. First, let us offer some love and light out to Israel and Palestine, who are still warring with each other. Let's send them some peace. Let's think about everyone who is still battling COVID. I know it's getting less and less every day, but people in other countries like India especially are still suffering greatly. So let's send them some love and light. And let's just send a little bit of love and light out to anyone who needs it this week. Amen. And I will read for the meditation fit the second, the Bellman's speech. The bellman himself, they all praised to the skies. Such carriage, such ease and such grace, such solemnity too. One could see he was wise the moment one looked in his face. He had bought a large map representing the sea, without the least vestige of land, and the crew were much pleased when they found it to be a map they could all understand. What's the good of Mercator's North Poles and equators, tropics, zones, and meridian lines? So the bellman would cry, and the crew would reply, they are merely conventional signs. Other maps are such shapes with their islands and capes, but we've got our brave captain to thank, so the crew would protest, that he's bought us the best, a perfect and absolute blank. This was charming, no doubt, but they shortly found out that the captain they trusted so well had one only notion for crossing the ocean, and that was to tingle his bell. He was thoughtful and grave, but the orders he gave were enough to bewilder a crew. When he cried, steer to starboard, but keep her head larboard, what on earth was a helmsman to do? Then the bowsprit got mixed with the rudder sometimes, a thing, as the bellman remarked, that frequently happens in tropical climes when a vessel is, so to speak, snarked. But the principal failing occurring in the sailing, and the bellman perplexed and distressed, said he had hoped at least when the wind blew due east that the ship would not travel due west. Amen. Second reading is from the Baker's Tale. My father and mother were honest, though poor. Skip all that, cried the bellman in haste. If it once becomes dark, there's no chance of a snark. We have hardly a minute to waste. I skip 40 years, said the baker in tears, and proceed without further remark to the day when you took me aboard of your ship to help you in hunting the Snark. A dear uncle of mine, after whom I was named, remarked when I bade him farewell, "Oh, skip your dear uncle," the bellman exclaimed as he angrily tinkled his bell. He remarked to me then, said that mildest of men, "If your Snark be a Snark, that is right. Fetch it home by all means, you may serve it with greens, and it's handy for striking a light. You may seek it with thimbles and seek it with care. You may hunt it with forks and with hope. You may threaten its life with a railway share. You may charm it with smiles and soap." That's exactly the method, the bellman bold in hasty parentheses cried. That's exactly the way I have always been told that the capture of Snarks should be tried. But oh, beamish nephew, beware of the day, if your Snark be a Boojum, for then you will softly and suddenly vanish away and never be met with again. Now is the time in our service where we ask you for your kind donations toward the good works of this church. Please return your pledge cards as soon as you can, and we sure thank you for all the support you're showing us. Now, let's pull up my sermon chair. So the title of this sermon is Snarks, Boojums, and Fools. In 2015, which is my first year ministering to this congregation, I preached a version of this sermon for that year, which was the theme of the year, which was the hero's journey, referenced often by Joseph Campbell. We went through every part of the hero's journey that year, month after month, essentially giving us all an education in the best elements of storytelling, letting us reflect on why this universally speaks to our personal journeys, our spiritual journeys, and otherwise, and how we share them in this sacred space and sacred time together. This came early in that first year under the call to adventure part of the hero's journey. And I think it's a good and perfect story to recount right now, 6 years into this incredible journey we've been on together. And still, we are just beginning to venture out again after this pandemic year. So this is sort of timely. There's something special about the stories and poems of Lewis Carroll. When I thought about writing The Call to Adventure, it was his work that came to mind first. He was a master of the profound and ridiculous. Alice in Wonderland, of course, is a terrific, though unusual and fantastical, hero's journey story in itself. But many of his poems, like The Hunting of the Snark and Jabberwocky, are placed under the genre of nonsense poetry. They are whimsical, to say the least, made with made-up words and fanciful metaphors. But they also hold the seed of something that I think is important to venturing out, probably the most important thing. They make us think in an unfamiliar way, force us to try and piece together something in our logical minds that can't be pieced together logically, because the reality it portrays is quite different from our normal reality, if there's such a thing. The hero's journey story often begins in the mundane world, where the days bump up against one another and life goes on as usual. In the modern world, we call this our comfort zone. And a year plus of pandemic has taught us all probably more than we needed to know about getting out of our comfort zones, or rooting very deeply into our comfort zones. It's been a weird year. We like the comfort zone for its sameness, for its constancy and structure, its familiar streets and faces and ideas. Google and YouTube and Amazon are very familiar with your comfort zones. Why would someone want to leave the comfort of familiar surroundings to venture into unknown territory? Why risk it all? For what? Leaving the comfort zone is scary. It brings unknown dangers, and anything could happen. When I think of anything could happen, my mind turns to the image of the Fool from the classic Rider-Waite tarot deck, and I meant to grab my order of service from 2015 to show that to you. The Fool card, which is numbered 0, is a perfect metaphor for venturing out. It represents beginnings, spontaneity, innocence, incentive, and optimism. He is eager and expectant, the spirit in search of experience, who is able, because of his innocence and sincerity, to take an empty-handed leap into the void to get where he's going, or to have unwavering faith that he won't fall because someone is watching over him. The precipice is before him, and his trust and confidence has the potential to take him anywhere. Anything could happen. And he's open to it because he isn't listening to reason. He's following his heart and his feet to wherever it might lead him, for good or for bad. It's rather courageous, I think, to allow ourselves to be the fool, the wanderer, the pilgrim, to have that much faith in our journey, and to head out into the unknown with little but our wonder with the mystery and our willingness to be transformed, no matter the risk. Now, if you've got that picture of the Fool card in your mind, it might sound kind of familiar because we've all seen it, because we look at it right over my shoulder here every time we sit in this sanctuary. Our mosaic is very similar to the Fool card. He is both a pilgrim and a wanderer. He has faith enough to walk a dangerous precipice with his eyes up at the sky instead of down on the ground where they should be. You can call it foolishness, but faith is a powerful thing, and it has as much truth as reason in it. It's hard for us to lighten up when violence and injustice, not to mention our own hectic lives and a global pandemic, take up a lot of space in the front of our minds. It's hard not to take ourselves so seriously when we persist in believing that it's only our diligence that makes the difference. We know what responsibility means and hard work and have to. But I'm convinced that venturing out begins not with a quick and clear call to adventure where you just pack everything up and cut clean and deep and hope, though that can happen too. I think that the seeds of adventure and change begin with making room for days when we disappear, do something completely different, things that can surprise and inspire us. Some of my best memories as a kid was when my mom would decide on the way to school to go to the beach, or to take the boat to the Vineyard or Nantucket and have lunch, or go for ice cream and ride down Potter Street Hill over and over again to make us giggle. That was before there was a stop sign between hills, which is why they put it up for people like us. I went to school for many years in Fairhaven at St. Joe's, even though we lived in New Bedford, and these adventures would often begin by catching the bridge in the morning, just as I did this morning on my way here, and we were going to be late anyhow. These were distinctive days out of ordinary time. and they filled my young soul with a mischievous glee. Not just because I was venturing out while the rest of the poor kids had to go to school, but that it was my mother, this symbol of structure and organization and normalcy, who had initiated this deviation from what we were supposed to do. And that was cool. Because it happened so seldom, it was even more special. And it made me see my mom in a different light. It broke down my understanding of what has to be done. I've never forgotten those first feelings of that sort of freedom, of being completely unencumbered by a structured day where the hours are measured and things were expected. I understood that we couldn't do this every day, but some days, and for no particular reason other than an old bridge, maybe we could. The call to adventure doesn't have to be an empty-handed leap into the void that includes uprooting yourself and moving completely out of your comfort zone. It can be putting your comfort zone in a little box on the shelf for a while and just having the courage to do something different for no real reason other than to discover what might happen when you do. Let's return to the nonsense of Lewis Carroll. There's plenty of scholarly theories about the symbolism in the hunting of the snark. I propose that we can look at the snark metaphorically as the ability to let go, to take a risk, to answer the call, even take an empty-handed leap into the void in order to keep your mind and body healthy and balanced and yourself progressing spiritually. A line in Fit the Fourth, The Hunting, backs up my suspicions. It says, "For the snark's a peculiar creature that won't be caught in a commonplace way. Do all that you know and try all that you don't. Not a chance must be wasted today." I think that snark we seek can be amorphous and change shape according to what we need it to be. It's the courage to appreciate a day out of regular time, or more than a year out of regular time. The strength to begin anew when we're ready, and the fortitude to carry through that which we start. It's the place in our hearts that recognizes and appreciates the beauty of the balance in our nature and the wisdom to be gained by our experiences, both good and bad. It's the seed of everything that could ever be if we only take the chance and venture out, even if we only take a few tiny steps. And this year has been a lesson in tiny steps, hasn't it? This imaginary animal invented by Lewis Carroll as the subject of his mock heroic poem gives the anxious hunters a remarkable chase. And in the end, the slippery snark turns out to be a boojum. So if hunting the snark represents the quest of dreamers and visionaries, what about the boojum? I have two theories on what the boojum might be. The first is what I call the boojum of what if I do. This boojum is the one that you meet when you take a risk and it fails. Odds are, invariably, that you can't get your snark every time. Occasionally, we all find ourselves in the position of being completely, embarrassingly, and horribly wrong. Nobody likes this, ever. It can be scary and mortifying and dangerous to our fragile little egos, and it makes us often hold our tongues or stay put in a safe place because of our fear of failure or disappointment. But that's how we learn in life, right? No matter how cautiously you creep through it, no matter how hard you fight the fool, mistakes and bad things cannot be avoided. I think it's courageous to admit that we're wrong when we're wrong, or to admit that what feels right in your heart is your truth even when others think you're wrong. I think we accomplish so much more in our psychological and spiritual development when we accept and expect that sometimes we will produce some magnificent, brilliant failures and have the foolish courage to laugh and move on. My second theory is the Boojum of what if I don't? And to me, this is the scarier of the two. This is the Boojum you drag behind you like Marley's chains in A Christmas Carol. Except unlike Marley, these chains are dragged to the end of our life instead of throughout the eternity of death. This Boojum is the one that makes the horrible sound of, I wish I would have, or I definitely should have, or the worst, if only. This Boojum is the dark finger of regret, especially for the things that with a little moxie we might have changed. It's the Boojum that sits on your chest in the last hours of your life and asks you why. Regret is a powerful emotion. And for some reasons, we humans are strangely drawn to it, useless as it is to change what has gone before us. Hindsight being 20/20, we often realize later that the risk we once thought was so great was just a drop in the bucket compared to the more important risks we eventually have to take, like being a parent, or a teacher, or a fireman, or a fisherman, or a minister, or being a Unitarian Universalist, for that matter. These are the Boojums that supplant the snark, that keep us in our comfortable places, free from risk and harm, or so we think. The place where fear or regret tie us tightly to one safe way of doing things. So all of this can apply to our lives and our own journey. Calls to adventure will take many forms, and we have to be willing to take the risks and go forward, whether we are jumping right off the precipice on an exciting new journey, or whether we're just stepping carefully out of our comfort zones and trying new things, accepting the gentle changes that unfold. We finally ask ourselves, what am I holding back? What am I afraid of? Why? This is how we move forward. This is how we take the leap. Our congregation has taken quite a leap this year, because often the call to adventure and the work that it takes to be a hero is thrust upon us, like so many other reluctant heroes in our myths. In my role here as your new, almost settled minister, I have stepped aboard this sturdy old ship as its captain, strapped on my new visionary goggles and my thinking cap, refilled my moxie tank, and I am ready to lead the hunt for the fugitive snark. If it be a Boojum or not will depend a great deal on the cooperation and communication of this crew, and I call all hands on deck. We have some real work to do to keep this church and to keep our heads above water, and I ask that we undertake to do this work joyfully, make some new history, and look at it with a call to adventure in mind, with our story, the story of the long dream of this church in mind. We have to breathe new life into this church, and it will take all of us to answer that call. Do we have the faith to take the leap? I think we do. Do we have the courage to face our fears, step out of our comfort zones, and wrestle that snark from the depths to discover our power and move forward into unknown territory? Yes, church, yes! But there is so much work to be done to navigate our way. I look forward to weathering some storms and trying to set this ship on a true course with your help. So do all that you know and try all that you don't, for our chance is here and now to make something different happen. And not a chance must be wasted today. So may it be for me and thee. Our closing words are from The Vanishing. They sought it with thimbles, they sought it with care. They pursued it with forks and hope. They threatened its life with a railway share. They charmed it with smiles and soap. They shuddered to think that the chase might fail, and the beaver, excited at last, went bounding along on the tip of his tail, for the daylight was nearly past. "There is Thingumbob shouting," the bellman said. "He is shouting like mad, only hark! He is waving his hands, he is wagging his head, he has certainly found a Snark." They gazed in delight while the butcher exclaimed, "He was always a desperate wag." They beheld him, their baker, their hero unnamed, on the top of a neighboring crag. Erect and sublime for one moment of time. In the next, that wild figure they saw, as if stung by a spasm, plunge into a chasm, while they waited and listened in awe. "It's a Snark!" was the sound that first came to their ears and seemed almost too good to be true. Then followed a torrent of laughter and cheers. Then the ominous words, "It's a boo." Then silence. Some fancied they heard in the air a weary and wandering sigh that sounded like jump, but the others declare it was only a breeze that went by. They hunted till darkness came on, but they found not a button or feather or mark by which they could tell that they stood on the ground where the baker had met with the Snark. In the midst of the words he was trying to say, in the midst of his laughter and glee, he had softly and suddenly vanished away, for the Snark was a Boojum, you see. Hold fast, church. We love you. We will see you next week for some more storytelling. Hold fast. Be well.